Good morning, and thank you for joining us. My name is Katie Schauer, and I'll be your host for this morning's webinar. You've joined us for our part 2 in our Learn in 30 series for System Platform 2020 Top 5 Features. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. All lines are muted, so please use the Q&A and chat boxes for any questions, and we will stay on the line at the end to answer those questions. So if you do have to drop off, we are recording today's session, so we will be sending that out to you later. So you'll be able to hear the answer to those questions if you're unable to stay longer than 30 minutes. Again, Q&A and chat box, we are recording. If you have any questions, feel free to enter those. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brian Premock, who is muted. Hold on one moment. There you go, Brian.
Okay, thanks for muting me. You would have heard me sing in the background. Hey, good morning, Katie, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our next Learn in 30 segment on the top 5 features of the new System Platform 2020 from AVEVA. I'm Brian Premock. I'm Director of Business Development with InSource. I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Glenn Yancey, our Technical System Consultant that's down in Florida. Good morning, Glenn. How you doing?
Fantastic, Brian. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. We survived the hurricane, the first one of the season. So what can go wrong from here, right?
Yes.
Anyway, well, cool. Hey, you know, Glenn and I were with everyone last week. We covered both pieces of the new SCADA releases in 2020 from AVEVA. Last week we covered InTouch. This week we're going to cover more System Platform. You know, and last week I got a little nostalgic going back to 1987 and talking about the Wonderware story and where they came from, and really was emphasizing their commitment to their customers, because it's not what you make with the SCADA, or the SCADA software itself doesn't do anything for your business. It's really what you make in it, the business rules, the graphics, the capabilities that you build into an application that bring value to your company as an ongoing asset. And they're only an ongoing asset as long as you can continue to modernize those things. And they've done a great job with their software across the board and making sure that customers can continue to do that. But I'm going to switch gears this week and talk about the other part of their business, which is really their commitment to innovation. And I think it's really a hallmark of their product vision of trying to push the envelope of thought and technology leadership. And nowhere is that more true than in System Platform in 2020. And really the new head end of that solution, which we call Operations Management Interface, kind of a play on the old idea of HMI. And I also talked a lot about the 2018 merger that Schneider Electric did to form AVEVA. So this is now a $1 billion standalone software company that's got not just Wonderware, but many of the assets that were part of Schneider Electric in what we'd call the industrial software portfolio. The team has done a phenomenal job in expressing their strategy and vision and integrating these solutions. And I think, other than this static slide, the way I like to explain it to people is that the AVEVA team is saying, look, to be successful as an industrial provider today, you've got 2 games you're playing, and you've got to be successful at both these games. The first game, if we want to call it that, is the asset lifecycle. That's everything you need, or that's that whole lifecycle curve that goes from R&D to simulating your equipment, to building your equipment, let's say the 3D design of that equipment, putting that and landing that equipment in your plants, then monitoring and controlling it, tracking production right in the middle here, and ultimately making sure that it's running, it's performing as an asset, and you get maximum return on that asset in your strategies for maintaining it and keeping it up and running. And the other game you've got to be successful at is the operations lifecycle. So that's all the products that you're going to run on those assets. And in this day and age, with SKU proliferation and demands from our customers for all these different variants, whether it's in product types or variety packs, or whether it's in the packaging that goes with them, there's an explosion here. So you've got to be able to schedule that production, minimize disruption and going from SKU to SKU. You've got to monitor and control it, track production. And you've got to make sure that you're continually complying with your customers' requirements in their contracts. So that's quality compliance. And at the same time, you got to make sure you're maximizing yield with as much or as little waste as possible. And you're continually trying to optimize this process. There's a lot going on here. But what's really cool about their portfolio is that the visualization engine is central to both of those games. And true enough, that's where they believe it's that kind of piece here that can help you be successful at winning both of them. And so if I had to summarize in all the conversations we have with customers today, one of the most emergent plays that we see that most companies are running is they're thinking about, let's call it the control room of the future. It's modernizing the vision of the control room to achieve center of excellence. And this is the way I would explain it. I think most industrial companies, just about any company, can relate to the fact that at top of house, you run your business with an IT enterprise solution. Could be the big people like Oracle or SAP, could be more emerging lean solutions like Microsoft Dynamics. Whatever it is, this is where you take purchase orders in from customers. This is where you purchase raw materials that are needed to produce. This is where you send work orders to the floor. This is where you realize the inventory of what's been made and ultimately go and invoice and recognize the cash that comes along with making the products and services you deliver. It's kind of the end all be all. Down at the bottom are those assets. Those are the equipment that you've built that's producing the value and delivering the end product that you're selling to your customer. And in between, you know, there's a lot going on here. We have sources of the truth. Some of these sources we have opted and purposefully chosen. Others come along with the equipment that you purchased. It was delivered from the OEM, or it was kind of defaulted into because you acquired a plant. Above that is where the operations team is working every single day to kind of make sure things are in order. And a lot of times the operation execution still gravitates towards Excel spreadsheets, even paper-based solutions. And this group really needs information to make sure that they're producing the right things. So they've got a schedule, they've got the right materials on hand. They're running their SOPs here. This is the rules, recipes, whatever's required to make the products. They're staying on top of status. You know, is our equipment up or down? Can we get a handle on that? Why is it down? They're also testing for quality and making sure it's conforming and maximizing yield. And they've got to run a strategy for asset maintenance, and they're constantly looking at variance. In fact, many customers complain that the variance is really kind of like firefighting, and they're trying to get ahead of that curve. How do I can use data to get out of firefighting mode and actually into preventative mode? And then optimally, some of the best-in-class companies are saying, look, this is the bits and bytes of what we do, but can we put this in terms of the financial understanding without going and waiting for the information to get up to the IT enterprise? Can we see how our plant is performing on a revenue basis based on the sales orders and the ideal contribution margin of those different products? And that means they need a better understanding of fixed costs and variable costs. And ideally, if we can distill this down to KPIs and we hit those KPIs, we have a reasonable belief that we're going to be able to achieve these revenue targets that we're trying to achieve. So there's a lot going on here, and there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in doing this. And so System Platform and OMI really were designed with that idea. It's taking SCADA from the world of just showing process control with an eye towards being able to build out very, very quickly the tools and views that allow us to get to that type of information. And so this IT-OT convergence trend is really helping people make better decisions in their roles. So for instance, if you're an operator, you're able to cater to their need to say, are we meeting production goals in real time? Operational control, hey, did we fulfill our order? And this is done on an hourly shift basis. And then what can we do about it after shift? And then financial control gives the plant manager and above a sense of how well that plant is performing and better early indicators when costs are varying, which might affect their contribution margin or the revenue target. And there's a lot of challenges here, right? Because we understand that a lot of the data that you need to get these views comes from siloed information. And a lot of the attempts to do this come down to what we call extract, transform, and load efforts, which are custom engineering that's required to get the data out of these silos to deliver it in this format. And I think as we can all attest in 2020, the pandemic has taught us that the control room that we've experienced in the past isn't the control room of the future. That means that we need slices of this control room to be viewable by people, whether they're working from home, whether they're social distancing, or whether they're dispersed or they're walking around the plant floor. So getting the information in from any device at any time is critical. And so it brings us to the solution we talked about today, which is System Platform OMI 2020. It really is designed as a unified systems of systems approach. It's not your daddy's InTouch, so to speak. It's different, and it's on different levels because it's designed to connect, collect, integrate, analyze, and help people act on existing data. And it's a recognition that that data is coming from very diverse sources. So one asset could have information from the hardware, the PLC, from a software platform that's also looking at that asset. It can even come from things like web services as we talk to other silos of information in the plant. And it needs to be diverse enough so that you don't do this just at one site, but it's a whole constellation or galaxy that allows you to pull information from multiple sites into a single rolled up location. So with that said, as an introduction, a lot going on there, Glenn, why don't we walk through what we think are the top 5 features that help us achieve that in System Platform?
Absolutely.
Great. Well, why don't we get right to it and talk about number 5? And that is, big words here, application server propagation improvement. Now, you're going to kind of help us backtrack a little bit and talk about what an application server is, how it works, and what this really means. So why don't you start from there, Glenn?
Sure. Thanks, Brian. So AVEVA has made great strides in 2020 to make System Platform faster in how changes are propagated from the template level down to the instance level. And this word propagation just means to push down changes or modifications to lower levels, such as those derived templates or instances. So now it takes under 5 minutes to propagate up to 250,000 objects. But like you were saying, Brian, I do think I need to take a step back, and with all this talk of templates and instances, I think it's best to do a bit of a refresh of what is System Platform and what is the Galaxy. So as far as what System Platform is, it's just an object-oriented environment where assets are digitally replicated into objects. So we have templates, which are our development objects where we define our standards. And then we have instances, which are objects that are derived from those templates and become the runtime version of those physical assets. So System Platform doesn't necessarily have to cater to any specific hardware type for PLCs and other devices, as is considered hardware agnostic. And the environment in which we develop our application, or also our Galaxy, we call that the IDE, or Integrated Development Environment. So let's on to the next slide, please. So this word Galaxy is nothing more than our application. It is a database that contains all of the information of the structure in our Galaxy, or the structure in our application, as well as the templates and instances and the relationships that they all have to each other. So next slide, please. Now, whenever we develop our Galaxy, what's very important to us is something called the model view, which is based off of an object called an area. An area becomes our geographical or logical representation of where our assets are located, or how they're going to be grouped together. So that model view then becomes, in InTouch OMI, becomes our navigational model. And our navigation model just becomes buttons that we can select to expose the graphics and other symbolic content of the instance that gets selected from those areas that were defined by the model view. Next slide. So here we see a model view that is exposing our instances as they're contained in the model view. Instances can contain other instances, by the way, in the form of a concept called containment to further match the PLC's data structure. And that's very important to us to help establish that link between us and the PLC. If we match our data structures correctly, then the linkage to those input and output addresses become automatic. Next slide. So all of this that I was mentioning before is designed to show how we create logical or digital representations of our assets. Next slide. So our templates, as I was mentioning before, they represent our standards for developing those instances. And instances end up as children of those templates from a genealogy perspective. So those instances inherit all of the components that we define on these templates. So we have inputs and outputs, also known as attributes. Think of them like tags, because essentially that's really what they are. They are our I/O tags. They represent things like statuses and process variables for inputs, or commands and set points for outputs. We have scripting here to further expand the behavior of those objects. We can turn on history for our attributes, as well as control how we interact with them, as well as alarms through security. We can define faceplates and graphics on the template level so that each instance we create from that template maintains the same graphical standards. Next slide, please. So once we have this structure in place, once we have these templates defined, then our instances get created from them. And then we can start to plug in other components to give us information beyond just the typical SCADA application. We can focus on things like maintenance systems. We can focus on things like workflow. We can trigger a workflow based on a value-changing state. We can measure energy consumption for things like boilers and other devices where we need to figure out how much gas or how much electricity is being utilized. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we can ascertain beyond just a SCADA once we have System Platform as our defined structure. Next slide, please. So this is just really quickly showing the concept of how change propagation works. So we have a master template. In that master template, we have four tags or four attributes: temperature, pressure, level, and alarm. From that, I create another level of templates, derived templates, that have master as their parent template. But this is where I start to create those variations. For one template, I create an under temp tag. For the other one, I create a misalignment tag. So here's where that divergence is beginning to happen. And then from that next level of templates, I can create my instances, which become the runtime representation of our assets, or digital representation of those assets. So if I make a change to the top level template, it gets pushed down or propagated. And the instances just inherit those changes. So next slide, please. So just to recap, with all that being said, it's just showing how propagations that we were mentioning before in the earlier slides have gone through vast improvements in the speed and efficiency in how we can make a change and have that change get pushed down to any derived templates and instances, including things like attributes, graphics, scripts, and any other content that we place in there. So again, in 2020, that is much, much faster in pushing down those changes. So on to the next topic.
Okay, well, great. And, again, in some of the larger distributed applications we see, water, wastewater, utilities, gas pipeline, it's not uncommon to have a lot of templates deployed across a wide area. And to be able to propagate changes across that network for up to 250,000 objects in 5 minutes is really impressive. Which brings us to number 4, Glenn. I talked a lot about the promise of OMI, or technically what the marketing team calls InTouch OMI. Let's go through some of the new apps and capabilities to help us customize and deliver that experience.
Sure. So this is just taking a quick look at our Control Center, a unified operations interface that is bringing together multiple pieces of content into one display that focuses on overviews as well as key performance indicators, maybe GIS maps, and other video content like cameras and so forth. So on to the next slide. Now, as I mentioned before, we have our plant model view. That's very important for us. But in 2020 of OMI and System Platform, they've made that much more customizable. So we don't necessarily have to bring in the model view exactly as it is. So we can take certain parts of that and build our own model view with aliases and so forth that may cater to specific operators. So I can create a model view that shows only equipment for a specific site, or maybe a model view that focuses on just pumps, or maybe even a model view that focuses on my control engineers that are interested in PID loop tuning. So every instance that I select that exists in those areas from that model view will then display their graphical content based on the dedicated panes of that graphic type, such as an overview symbol, detail, faceplate, external content, alarms, and so forth. Next slide, please. Now, in 2020, they've also added a scripting environment into OMI, which allows us to first create a view app namespace that allows you to define tags, and then a scripting editor that allows you to extend the behavior of that OMI. So how things may open or how things may get displayed, you can further control that beyond just the typical checkboxes and so forth that OMI gives you. So thankfully, we now have a scripting editor, very similar to Visual Basic, that we can utilize to, again, further the behavior. Next slide. So these are just some of the apps that we're going to discuss. Some of these apps are new, and other apps have been improved. So let's start with the map app first. Next slide. So for the map app, it's always been there to at least provide an overlay on top of a mapping server like Google Maps or Bing or OpenStreet or Esri. And from that, we provide longitude and latitude coordinates, as well as other animations to show on the screen, such as alarms or value changes. Now, this map app in 2020 allows us to do interaction with internal GIS systems based off of those same technologies to further incorporate their capabilities into the OMI application. Next slide, please. The Content Presenter app is designed to display graphics that are deemed to be KPIs or mini overviews, putting them into kind of a visual array to determine how they're operating. So this could be used to represent things like a pump station or lift station, or maybe flow meters that you want to do comparison between those, and whether or not they're generating alarms, or are they on scan or off scan, or maybe just to visualize some limits to compare against those other stations. So this allows us to do a lot of the things where we had to do scripting in the past, but now we can create an array of graphics and have on the screen to make quick generalizations of, is the pump station up and running, or are they down, and things like that. All right, next slide. So this app that we have here, the PLC Logic, is a newer app. It's there to monitor your PLC source code in the form of ladder logic and allow admins and operators to help troubleshoot any issues on the control layer based on what's happening on the SCADA layer without them having to open up a separate program. This can actually be embedded inside of the InTouch OMI application and makes it quicker to troubleshoot or diagnose specific issues in the logic. Next slide, please. So like the other slide that we showed before, the PLC Logic, the artificial intelligence is going to require something called the 2020 Flex subscription that we'll discuss towards the end of the presentation. The artificial intelligence app here feeds off the values that are coming in from our attributes or tags, as it's doing a little bit of machine learning to monitor when a value goes outside of its normal parameters for what a tag typically would go through. It provides us real-time anomaly detection and learns off of the operator on whether the newsfeed item was helpful or something that could be discarded. So you'll see a little thumbs up or thumbs down for a newsfeed tag that shows up, and then you can get some details on that, and you can rate that in the system to say, is this helpful or is this not helpful? And that helps the machine itself or the application itself in OMI determine what types of anomalies should I put more emphasis on when detecting. Next slide, please. Now, responsive design is not necessarily new to 2020, but they've just made it much more efficient to do. It's placing the focus on creating just one application that can conform to multiple resolutions or form factors, adjusting that layout for a change in selection. So you can go from a small resolution like a phone or tablet all the way up to a 4K monitor and not have to do any scripting to say, hey, I'm opening this up in an iPad, or I'm opening this up on a 4K monitor. It's one application, and the layout will conform to that form factor without having to do any scripts. So Brian, let's take a quick look at the demo on the next slide, just kind of get an idea of how this is going to work. So you have a responsive layout editor at the top that you can choose to conform your layout to say, this is how the layout is going to look if I open this up on an iPad, and if I open my iPad in a portrait mode versus landscape mode. So you're not having to recreate your graphics. You're not having to recreate your layouts as separate objects. I can just adjust each portion of that layout to say, if this were an iPhone, then this is how I'm going to lay out my panes. If this were an HD monitor or 4K monitor, this is going to be how I lay out those panes. All right, so on to the next slide, please.
All right, well done. Brings us to number 3. I think we finally have arrived on a name for our drivers. Let's say that communication protocol that goes out to hardware. That makes sense for everyone. We call it communication drivers. And we've got some new features. Talk to us about that, Glenn.
Sure. So yes, communication drivers are the newer name for our OI servers under the AVEVA brand. So with that, AVEVA is bringing some newer drivers as well as enhancements to others. The OPC UA server turns System Platform's Galaxy attributes into a browsable system for other third parties to pull from, provided that security is enforced to access those set objects and attributes. So next slide, please. Now, the MQTT server has been updated as well to now be a separate server that's going to give us some focus on the Spark-Plug-B standard of MQTT. So for those that are just not familiar with MQTT, it's just a protocol that we use in the Industrial Internet of Things, or IIoT, so that we're able to pull from devices that are far remote, that are not necessarily on the same Wi-Fi as the server requesting the data. It just provides a low bandwidth means of pulling in those values from those edge devices through a broker and then over to the MQTT driver. Next slide, please. So on that same sentiment of having devices that are on the periphery or on the edge, the telemetry driver in 2020 has also been expanded beyond just Modbus RTU and DNP3 to provide support for the IEC 60870 protocol. And this protocol is very similar to DNP3 used in telemetry, but also used in European and Asian markets such as water, wastewater, oil and gas, and power distribution. The telemetry server that we have here provides the store and forward capabilities for buffering data. With telemetry-based devices, those devices could buffer values and then all at one time send bursts of values within a second. So it's possible to have hundreds of values that come through within a 1 or 2 second time frame. And System Platform is there to be able to accept that based off of these telemetry drivers. So next slide, please.
Awesome. Well, counting down and running out of time at the same time, we'll talk about our integration environment, which is linked to AVEVA Connect. So AVEVA Connect is our common word for our cloud environment. And now we have tighter integration between our development environment that sits maybe on your laptop and the cloud to do some really cool things. So Glenn, can you show us what that means?
Yes, sir. So the AVEVA Connect platform, which includes the Integration Studio, is gearing up to provide more developmental support in the cloud, giving you the ability to export out to edge nodes and further strengthening our cloud solution. You know, it's funny, Brian, when people hear the word cloud, they get very scared. They have a fear of being hacked or just insecure communication, which really couldn't be further from the truth. AVEVA is ensuring secure communication to the cloud by meeting specific regulations for being compliant with those regulations to maintain a secure environment. And this is all built on the Microsoft Azure platform. Next slide, please. So the Integration Studio itself allows you to, as a developer, allows you to create VMs in the cloud to replicate your architecture in a sandbox type of setting. So here we're just seeing a bunch of applications that exist as VMs in the cloud that we can work on in our little sandbox environment. Next slide, please. So all that being said, it's all accessible from within the IDE now. And also accessible from within the IDE for System Platform is the ability to share graphics. Now, you probably are familiar with the word orchestra graphics, and that word sadly is going away and being changed to industrial graphics. But we can take those industrial graphics and share them in the Integration Studio and allow other products in that portfolio to utilize as graphics, whether or not it's OMI or InTouch HMI or Insight or Edge, which others may know as InTouch Machine Edition, or SciTech, which is now called Plant SCADA. So we're able to share one graphic or a library of graphics that we create once and utilize them across our portfolio. So we'll take a quick look on the next slide of what that may look like, specifically in Insight. Now, if I were to to create graphics in my system platform application. And these are graphics that I customize. I can put them into the cloud through the AVEVA Connect and Integration Studio, all done through the IDE, by the way, that integrated development environment where we access our Galaxy. And once it's there, then I can start to pull them in and create dashboards. Some of those dashboards could be graphics that are specific to Insight, but other ones are graphics that I created as architecture graphics in the past and now industrial graphics. So I can pull them in and link them to the tags, as well as show things like GIS type of maps or trends or other types of charts, like bar charts and pie charts on the screen. Once all that's defined, then I can access that through these dashboards, so I can visualize what is happening in real time. All right, so on to the next slide. Yeah, it is. It is.
And I think that's going to end our technical program. I'm sorry we're running a little bit late, but the last feature that we chose is really more commercial. It's called the Flex program. And so I'll take this one, Glenn. But the idea of Flex is the idea that we're now offering two ways to consume software at AVEVA. Number one is we can still buy perpetual licenses, and you have that license, and you can subscribe or that you put on maintenance so that you can get its upgrades and you have access to technical support. But the new model that's coming forward is about providing the software as a service. And essentially, it's built on a currency of credits, so that every single product in the AVEVA portfolio has a certain number of credits that's required to use that piece of software under the terms of a subscription. Now, it's not based on the cloud. The subscription means that you still get that physical license, you still install it at your site. You're just accounting for it in a way that you say, I'm going to have all these licenses, it's this many credits, and then I have full control over how I'm going to deploy them. I can use them all at once. I can decide that I've changed my mind, take products out of service, get the credits back, and put them towards something else. So the idea is that we have a lot more flexibility to use products in the portfolio. And the way this kind of works is that if we were to put together an OMI solution, we'd work with you and our team would decide these are the products that we need. We go to the credit table, we add up the total number of credits over here, and we say, okay, to run the products that we need across the different parts of your organization requires, in this case, 4,180 credits. Then we go to the subscription packages, which there are 4 of them that range from essential to standard, professional, and premium. And they all come with a certain minimum amount of credits per year that are applied towards the use of those product licenses. Now, if you're like me, I used to buy Microsoft Office, and then about 5 years ago, I changed over to Office 365. And the reason I did that is because the subscription started to bundle things that I paid for separately. And that's the same thing that's true with Flex. So in addition to the credits to run your products, you also get more bundled features. These are some of the library solutions that we show, these advanced app solutions, with more to come. It also includes technical support, so that's built in as well. There's no need to have that as a separate line item. It includes development licenses. It also includes the Integration Studio, or a single seat to the Integration Studio that you replenish depending on the number of hours that you use that tool up in the cloud. And it starts to do away with the classical metrics by which we've sold the product. So SCADA oftentimes has had tiers where you could buy 1,000 IO, 5,000 IO, 25,000 IO. With Flex, those limits start to go away. We just buy a product that enables the application server. You can access as many IO as possible. And we also have a supervisory server so that you can have as many clients as you'd like, or could be supported by the server without counting the need or pay for on an individual client basis. So a great deal of flexibility is offered there as well. And we don't need to pay for things such as redundant licenses for situations in which you have a primary and backup server. And so the way those two ideas come together is that in this instance, we needed this many credits. We go and we pick the standard, which is 3,200 credits per year. We add 2 add-on modules of 500 credits, and we've come up with a value of 4,200 credits. And then you can purchase that on an ongoing annual basis, or you can subscribe to this on a longer-term basis of 3 or 5 years. Well, I know that we're a few minutes over. I want to thank you for your patience. There was a lot to cover here. I know, Katie, we can stick around for Q&A, although we're over a lot of time. So we'll keep the lines open. If you have a question, certainly send it to Katie and we'll answer it. And I also would like to pre-advertise that this Learn in 30 series will continue through the fall. We've got a full lineup coming, and we're going to talk next about the AVEVA portfolio and show you how that's really enabling digital transformation for customers now in the years to come. Thanks for joining us.
Great. Thanks, Brian and Glenn. We do have a few questions. Brian, could you explain the relationship between AVEVA and Schneider? Is AVEVA part of Schneider, or is it vice versa?
They are independent companies. AVEVA actually did this, let's just call it a merger, and essentially rolled out of their business the industrial software portfolio and combined it with software offerings that already existed as AVEVA. So this is now a combined entity, separate independent company out of the UK. But the Schneider Electric is the 60% majority shareholder of that company. So they're at arm's length with each other. Schneider Electric trades independently of AVEVA, but Schneider Electric as an entity is a majority stakeholder.
Great. What are the plans for the PLC OMI? Shouldn't it be supporting Schneider and not Rockwell? I guess this talks. This goes to supporting our idea that we are technology agnostic.
Well, I know that that's on the roadmap, and I didn't have time to show the upcoming roadmap, but I know in talking to the product team that that's something that's coming up and obviously is near and dear to their heart because they're kind of cousins with each other. So look for that to come sooner than later.
Okay. And then we've also got, can clients switch to Flex and then pick cheaper or more expensive products, i.e. a customer running SciTech can move to industrial graphics and hop to system platform?
Yeah, in fact, one of the things that we're seeing and talking to clients about is just going out and saying, hey, look, you can continue with perpetual license model that you have. Normally there's a software maintenance and technical support agreement that goes along with that renews annually, but there is a path for people to essentially migrate from the perpetual model to subscription and actually give them some more credits in and above what they have licensed today so that they can go and expand into different parts of the portfolio. So it's a pretty good deal. And of course, the products perform the way they perform. So the industrial graphics you see today, whether you're licensing them perpetually or via subscription, the license and features are exactly the same. It's just commercially how you pay for it. So those industrial graphics you see today would absolutely work under either strategy. I hope I answered that in a way that made sense.
Yep. And then, Glenn, you mentioned in passing the use of video cameras on the OMI. Can you elaborate more about that? What type of interface? What type of cameras?
Sure. So we have a couple of ways of visualizing camera feeds in OMI. The first one is utilizing something called the External Content app, which just allows you to provide a URL to connect to an IP camera with its URL from that, and then you have a live feed. The other thing that we could do is if a camera solution has its own software and in the form of a .NET client control, think of it like an ActiveX. Then we can also pull that into the application and have visualize the camera feeds through that as well.
Good question.
Great. That looks to be all our questions for today. So I would like to remind you, we will be having the registration for our next webinar up by the end of this week. So that'll be ready for you to register for if you want the next session. If you do have any further questions, please contact us. You can reach us via our website. We have a contact us form right there at the top, or you can call us 877-467-6872. You can reach us via communications@insourcess.com, and we'd be happy to connect with you on any of this information you've heard or any of your needs that you have. With that, I'd like to thank Glenn and Brian for their time today, and thank you all for attending, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.